This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 23. Welcome to the 23rd episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I love hearing from you, so if you enjoy today's show, please stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes. You'll find the show notes for today's episode and all the podcast episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And you can also find me on Twitter at fertilefriday. And in today's episode, I'm very excited to be talking with Will Sachs, co-founder of the Kindara charting app. And if you haven't heard of Kindara, it is one of the most user-friendly fertility awareness-based charting apps available. So I started charting my cycles well before the age of charting apps, and I found Kindara to be one of the best fertility awareness-friendly charting apps out there. I love that the predictor setting is optional and that I can turn it off, and that the user-friendly interface allows me to track all of my fertility signs easily, and everything is laid out in a way where I can see it all at once, and I'm not really searching for anything. And I also love that using the Kindara app links you to a community of women who share their charts and help to support each other. And so Will studied mechanical engineering and economics at McGill University. He has a passion for taking big ideas and making them real, so enter Kindara. And when he learned about fertility awareness charting, he discovered the magic of the feminine and came to appreciate and understand women on a much deeper level. He appreciates how this level of understanding is lacking in our culture and has been tirelessly working to improve the ability of women to understand and track their fertility signs by creating the Kindara charting app. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Will.
Thanks, Lisa. Good to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on. I was super excited to have you. And so I did give you a bit of a background, but I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about how you found yourself working in the world of fertility awareness charting and what it was like for you to discover fertility awareness.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I was working as a building management consultant, doing energy management systems for large residential apartment buildings. And I'm a data nerd, and so I found this quite interesting. But I also spent a lot of time in boiler rooms with boilers and trying to figure out how they were working and reducing the amount of energy, water, and gas, and looking at the data and looking at the charts that were created. And it was really cool until I met Katie, my wife, and we dated for a few months, and then we had, the birth control conversation that every couple has. And I was an unenlightened male at this point, and so I asked, are you going to go on the birth control pill? And she said, no, I was on the birth control pill for a decade, and I didn't like it. And why don't you get a vasectomy? And
Touché.
Touché. So I thought about it and looked into it, and it's not as reversible as they say it is. And I might want kids someday. So I said, no, don't really like that. What about an IUD? And she said she had an IUD, and she got it taken out. After 6 weeks, she hated it. And then she introduced me to fertility charting and said, what about fertility charting? We can use that. And I just thought that was total BS. I did not believe her at all. I thought she was talking about the rhythm method, and I said, no, that's not effective. And then she gave me Taking Charge of Your Fertility and said, here, read this. You have no idea what you don't know about this. And so I read it and was just amazed and shocked that I had never been taught this ever. At this point I had a university degree, but I'd never been taught how human reproduction actually worked and the nuts and bolts of how a baby is created, really. Like they don't teach that detail. And I was just equally as amazed that women are only fertile for a few days a month. I didn't know that. I thought women could get pregnant at any moment, which is not true. And so I had this reaction of shock. And then after the reaction of shock, I had this next thing, which was, wow, this is really cool. I'd love to try this. Like, I'm in. So Katie and I started using the method and charting, and every morning she'd take her temperature, and I'd hear the beeping thermometer, and I'd elbow her in the ribs and be like, what was it? And she'd whisper like 97.4, and I'd be like, oh, cool. And I just found it so incredible that there was this rhythm that we could use to understand when we were fertile as a couple, and that I just was totally unaware of that rhythm before I did this reading. So then I read Garden of Fertility by Katie Singer and a bunch of other stuff about it, and we started using it, and I felt like it really brought us closer together, and we could have conversations that I'd never had with any of my previous girlfriends. And that was just really sweet. You know, it was good to share the responsibility for birth control, because like the pill, the woman is responsible for taking it, and the guy doesn't have to do anything. And with condoms, the guy pretty much has to do everything, and the woman doesn't have to do anything. And the experience of sharing that responsibility was really nice, because it is a shared responsibility, right? When a couple has sex, it's both of their responsibilities to decide whether they want to procreate or whether they don't want to procreate. And so fertility awareness puts that in the hands of both the man and the woman. And I really liked that. I just felt it was really sweet, and I understood Katie better as she was going through her cycle. So the more we did this, the more I was like, this is incredible. Like, there's a method of birth control that is side effect free, basically free, as effective as the pill, and brings couples closer together, helps women feel powerful in their bodies, and helps their male partners understand what it means to be a woman and what it's like to be a woman. And nobody knows about it. And I was like, how is that possible? There's got to be a catch. Like, what's the catch? What's the catch? And we kept using it, and there was no catch. And then I realized that the catch is that nobody had figured out a way to make money off it. So is this technology that's just languishing because nobody had figured out a way to make money on it, and because nobody had figured that out, nobody had invested any money in it. There'd never been any marketing behind it. And as a technology entrepreneur, I saw that, and then my next thought was, well, we should create a business around this. We're going to be the first company to ever get $1 million put behind fertility awareness. That was our joke.
That's amazing.
That the first $1 million ever invested in fertility awareness was going to be in Kindara, and it actually wasn't, because I think Tony Weschler, the software that they did previously, Ovusoft, had some money invested in it, but the implementation wasn't that great, and Tony wasn't that happy about it. I don't know much about that, but so we just set off. We're like, let's make a really beautiful charting app that's up to the job of helping women avoid pregnancy, and let's make a really nice connected thermometer that is beautiful and sexy and gives women a nice experience. And then we started Kindara, and then 7 out of 10 women downloading it were downloading it to get pregnant.
Yeah.
So then it became, oh wow, 70% of our market is women trying to get pregnant. So we very much have provided a solution for that side of the market too, and I think that we provide a lot of value in that area, and we have women using it to avoid pregnancy. So we're doing both now, and it's all under the umbrella conversation, which is when women and men understand how their bodies work and how to make babies and how to not make babies, it creates this sense of power and confidence that overflows into the other areas of their lives. And I believe it actually it's a mechanism to help end sexism and misogyny, and help men understand women, help women understand women, and that's why I find it so exciting and rewarding.
Yeah, there's just 100 different questions I could ask, or different areas that I could go, but I love your perspective on it. I love to hear just what the experience was like for you, because that's not a perspective that I've had on the podcast yet, you being the first male on the show.
Yeah.
And I could imagine some of the listeners thinking like, well, he's just a unicorn. Like, he just happens to be super amazing and whatever. But I feel like we kind of don't give guys enough credit. I feel like if you give men and women the opportunity to learn this information and to have the opportunity to understand more about how your partner works, I feel like we should give men the opportunity and give men the credit they deserve. So I guess the question would be for you, are you a unicorn, or are you just really unique, or do you feel like most men could just hop into this role and be comfortable with it?
Well, I definitely think most men could hop into this role and be comfortable with it. I think that men have one of two reactions when I explain what we're doing to them. One is, whoa, I don't want to know about any of that. And the other is, oh, really? Tell me more. I want to understand. And so I get both of those. I get the first one. I get the first one more, I think, but it's shifted over the 4.5 years that we've been doing this. I used to get the whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't want to understand. I don't want to learn about that. I get that less now, and I get the I'm interested more. And the first reaction is just it's an expression of fear, right? It's like I don't understand that. I don't feel equipped to understand that, and so I'm just gonna kind of sit in my culturally prescribed gender role of being a man and let women deal with that. And I think that's shifting. I mean, that is shifting. It's shifted. If you look at the arc of history, that is shifting. Mm-hmm. And men are understanding women better. Women are understanding men better. The gender fluidity is happening. Men don't have to be a certain way anymore. Women don't have to be a certain way. So the whole gender spectrum is I think an opening up of human potential and appreciating people for who they are and letting them be who they want to be. And I think that a lot of men, given that ground of you can be whoever you want and understand whatever you want and relate to whatever you want, I think a lot of men, given that opportunity, would relate to this body of knowledge and think it's cool. It's just that most men have been brought up in a culture that doesn't give them that freedom, but that's definitely coming. Yeah. So I think give it 5 years and this will be something that men feel comfortable talking about. Like, it's funny, most investors are male, right? So I've been pitching a cervical fluid business to men for 4 years now. And when we started it, and this might be because I was more uncomfortable with it than I am now. When we started, it was a stretch for me. Like I was more of an outsider or more of an edge case, I think. But definitely the people I was talking to found it harder to hear. But now I can just talk about cervical fluid and nobody bats an eyelid or an eyelash. And it's amazing to see that shift. Like we got written up in Time magazine recently, and it was it was CNN, and it was a pretty well-written article, and the comments were supportive, and it was in a mainstream publication, and that wouldn't have happened 4 years ago. 4 years ago, anything we put out was flamed instantly by an army of trolls. And so that was really rewarding to see, like, okay, the cultural acceptance of this is shifting. Like, people see the pill, and the pill was this huge human rights victory for women. Yeah. And it opened up our culture and made things possible for both men and women, and that wasn't possible previously. But I think that people see now, okay, that was 50 years ago. The pill's had its run. Like, what's next? What's next? And it's very obvious to me that we've just exited the period where chemistry solved all our problems, the pharmacological age. We're kind of exiting that, and now we're in the data age, and data is solving all our problems and connections between people and analyzing data. Yeah. And so it kind of makes sense that the next thing after the pill, which was a chemical solution, is a data solution, and one that works more harmoniously with our bodies. So I think people get that on a subconscious level, especially young women and men.
Well, like you mentioned, I feel like there's a shift because a lot of people are shifting towards this healthy lifestyle, exercising, eating well, running to the store to get hormone-free meat and antibiotic-free meat, and doing all this stuff to try to reduce your exposure to xenoestrogens. And then we get up and take the pill every day. Like, it kind of there's a disconnect there between what we're doing and how we actually feel. And so the pill might be kind of the last big thing for people to realize, if you're going to all the trouble to buy hormone-free meat, then you might want to consider not taking hormones every day. Yeah. And I wanted to just say something about what we were talking about earlier about kind of men and being able to be part of this role. And I feel like women are, to some extent, often very disconnected from our own bodies, especially in this culture where everything kind of tells us to not really even interact with our bodies, like from, tampons with applicators so that we're not touching ourselves, to the pill so that we don't know anything that's going on. And I feel like, you could probably argue that in some relationships, the male partner probably know more about what's happening with the woman's cycle than the woman to some extent. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from girlfriends where maybe they went on the pill and they had an adverse reaction with their moods, and it was their partner that was like, dude, you need to get off the pill. It's turning you crazy. So
Right.
I feel like it's almost like now it's giving men official permission for something that to some extent they were probably already doing. So,
Some men, yeah.
some men, not all men.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. So I grew up in Canada and we started the company while I lived in Canada, and then we moved to the US, and that divorcing of women from their bodies, I think, is even more extreme in the US than it is in Canada. And it's a real shame, I think.
How so? Because I still live in Canada, so I wouldn't know to compare it.
Like all my girlfriends so I lived in a house in college with 3 women and another guy, and they all had the keeper, the like menstrual cup, and they all talked about it, and I knew what they used.
Oh,
and,
this was in Canada.
This is in Canada.
Okay.
This is something we talked
I had
about.
the keeper as well.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that sounded like it was a good product. And then when I moved to the States, I just noticed that women were less likely to talk about that stuff with me. Like it was less on the list of things you could talk about. And I found a lot of women have never looked at their vaginas, you know? Like every man has like spent a lot of quality time with his penis by the time he's like 18 or by the time he's any age really.
Oh.
But women, that's not encouraged for women. And that's a real shame, I think. Because I could go on a big rant about this, but it used to be that we didn't own our bodies or our minds. Like it used to be that the church owned our minds and the church owned our bodies. And back in the Middle Ages, that was kind of how it was. Is that you didn't really own your mind or your body. And we went through this period of enlightenment where we started to own our minds, and we saw that we can have our own ideas and make our own mental landscapes and understandings of the world and have a free competition of ideas that creates culture. But we still, to a large part, women still aren't given permission to own their bodies, like culturally. And I think that's one of the next big shifts, because once you own your mind, the next thing is the extension of your mind, which is the vehicle that you carry your mind around in, which is your body. So I think giving people permission to own their bodies, which men have had for a long time, but in many ways, women, I don't think, have that permission in so many ways. So giving women permission to own their bodies is the next step. After owning your mind, you own your body, you own your community, you own your neighborhood, your family. It just gives you this sense of control and power over the rest of your life. So.
Well, as you were talking about that, I couldn't help but remember. So I went to a Catholic school, and I remember in the sex education, they showed the pictures, and the woman, they showed her vulva, if that's what you want to call it, but really it was like nothing and a dot.
Really?
Well, there was like a dot, and then there was like an arrow that said, this is the clitoris, and then there was like a little hole, and that was the vagina, and that was pretty much it. That was the totally unscientific like diagram that did not represent. So I actually
like, mine doesn't look like that.
Exactly. So I was the weirdo that actually went home and like took a little mirror and looked at myself. And so there was a short-lived but period of my life that I kind of thought that maybe I looked funny. And I think that a lot of women feel that way. They feel like this weird vaginal shame because they don't even know what normal vaginas look like, because when are you ever going to see a normal vagina? If you watch porn, I haven't really seen a lot of porn, but the vaginas look different. Like in porn, they all look the same, but women's vaginas are varied.
Yeah.
And where are we going to get that information, right?
Yeah, totally. So that should be part of sex ed, Everyone should be given like a hand mirror and sent home.
Or at the very least, an anatomically correct diagram that actually like looks like an actual person. That would be kind of a good place to start.
Yeah.
And so we kind of touched on the birth control pill and how it was this huge liberating thing for women. And I kind of see fertility awareness as being more of the huge new liberating thing for women for so many different reasons. I don't know if you wanted to kind of comment on that, what your experience is or what your thoughts are on that kind of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty much what I was saying before, in my opinion, that I watched Katie, when she started using it, go from being worried that she was pregnant every month for the last 2 weeks of her cycle to knowing that she wasn't pregnant and just knowing every day what was happening with her body. And that was really cool. And I feel like that set her up mentally to make other victories in her life. And I like to joke that, if men had uteruses, there's this, Gloria Steinem's got this essay, like, what if men menstruated, which is really awesome. But if men had uteruses and the same kind of hormonal landscape that changed throughout the month, I think there would be all kinds of tech to help men optimize and understand. And
totally,
there would be, would be, it seems like, because a woman's cycle is a very significant part of what it is to be a woman. That's what I see and have learned from Katie, and to have that be a black box and a question mark is really, really robs women of the experience of feeling like they know what's happening. And I think having that question mark and being told by culture that it's potentially something to be ashamed of and to not be understood makes it harder for women to achieve their potential in the world. That's what I think. Mm-hmm. Because I know, every person has something in them that they're ashamed of or that they don't understand. And a lot of times those things hold us back as human beings. And I think this is one that holds a lot of women back potentially because culturally it is just not addressed or understood. Mm-hmm. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is just, I think if men understood women better, and this is a technology to help men, like I understand Katie's cycle and what it's like to be Katie now better. If men understood women better, there'd be less of a battle of the sexes, and there'd be less hostility between men and women. And that's the world I want to live in. Like, I want men and women to live in partnership with one another and to appreciate one another and not to fight one another. And there's so much of that happens. Like, you get a group of guys together and there's like misogyny, you get a bunch of women together, and sometimes there's bad things said about men, and that doesn't help anybody. Like, that's not good for anybody. Yeah. So I think this is a technology to help get rid of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you can I think the understanding part is so important, the education part, because once you understand, then you have nothing to fear. The fear is all because we don't understand what's going on. That's why we're afraid. That's why we're afraid that our bodies are going to betray us and that we're going to get pregnant and we're not going to know. And it's all fear-based. But if you take away the fear by providing the education, that's kind of the first step. But then the education also it can also create an appreciation. So it's more than just, because instead of having such a negative view of women and all of our bodily functions and our periods and our mood changes, like you said, if you have a better understanding of it, you can actually develop an appreciation. So instead of just tolerating whatever and having that type of mentality, we can actually appreciate and celebrate, because it's pretty cool being a woman. It's pretty cool all the things our bodies can do.
I mean, the creators of all life, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we're talking about. It's like how humans are created on the planet.
Yeah. So, like, how did that get swept under the rug?
Right.
It's pretty important. That's how we're all here.
Pretty major. Yeah. So how did it get swept under the rug, and why is it swept under the rug?
Well,
and then you get into a crazy conversation that a lot of people can't hear, which is that power is so powerful and so big that it had to be controlled in some way culturally, right? For men to be in charge, we had to pretend that wasn't actually there, that women actually didn't create all life somehow, and that we just weren't going to talk about it.
So true. Yeah, it's so true, because I mean, in one way, when you learn the luteinizing hormone, and you learn about all the hormonal things, and you learn about all of the, I guess, the dynamics of how it all works and the nuts and bolts, on one hand, it's kind of complicated, but as you were doing your introduction in the very beginning and you were talking about how you have a university degree and you didn't learn this, like on the one hand, it's kind of complicated, but on the other hand, we learn a lot of complicated stuff, and it's kind of it's in a way, I guess you could say, ironic, but it's almost too ironic. It's like it has to be on purpose because we have so much technology, we have so much information, we have so much data. As you were saying, we're in a data-driven society, and we don't talk about this. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's an artifact of the pill too, because the pill came along and everyone was like, all our problems are solved.
Yeah.
And so now that people don't want to be on the pill, I think we have to open this conversation again. And doctors need to be taught about it. There's so many doctors that just have never been taught this, and so they don't know about it. And that's a real shame.
Well, since you brought it up, one of the questions, as I'm sure you can, anticipate what I'm going to ask. But I saw a clip of the appearance that you and Katie did on the doctors. Of course, that's where I'm going with this now. But, as someone who's been using fertility awareness, as I said, for like over a decade, it was really frustrating for me to see that fertility awareness is so misunderstood, like in the daytime on national television. What was that experience like for you? I don't remember the name of the doctor who basically said that, like, it's amazing that the two of you haven't conceived because most people, 85% of people would have conceived with this method, but 85% is a statistic for people who aren't using anything. And so correct. She clearly doesn't know she doesn't know anything about fertility awareness.
No, basically nothing. It was pretty frustrating. I mean, it was pretty frustrating. I wanted to wear my Kindara t-shirt and they wouldn't let me. And
seriously? Why wouldn't they let you?
I don't know. And then, I mean, it was a fun experience. It was pretty fun. It was also very frustrating because, she knew nothing about fertility awareness. They cut the segment down significantly. So there was a large part where I cited all the research. I made it a point to memorize all the research. And I basically corrected her and cited it all, and they cut that out because because daytime television. We met with Abby Epstein, who's doing the movie for Sweetening the Pill with Ricky Lake, and Ricky apparently was also on The Doctors and had like a horrible experience on that show. So I think it's kind of we shouldn't be too surprised at the show. It was cool that we got asked to be on it. But it's not cool that a board-certified OBGYN is on television spouting misinformation. Like, that's not really cool. And hopefully in the future that won't happen. Like, hopefully she'll learn about it a little bit more, and maybe they'll invite us back in a few years and do another segment on it. But it was frustrating, but at the same time, it's nice that a lot of people, heard about it, that it even exists, even if the information presented was totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, because even, I mean, there's something to be said for having that exposure. And when as soon as people Google you and search you, they'll find the correct information. And so I'm sure a lot of people, regardless of the, I don't know, kind of gong show that was, I don't know if there's a nicer way to say it, but regardless of that, I feel like the exposure is really, because back in the day, like, as I mentioned, there were no apps. Like, well, there was barely smartphones, but there really wasn't this awareness. And so what you and Katie have done with Kindara is huge in terms of bringing it to light. And so I'm very thankful that you're in the world and that Katie's in the world and that you had what's the word I'm looking for? But you just had that drive to just go and do something about it because you saw a hole in the market and you saw a way that you could help women to learn this information. And as I mentioned, one of the things I appreciate about Kindara is that it's actually an app based in the fertility awareness method. And so when I was looking for an app, to be honest, like, I didn't know anything about Kindara until I found the app, right? Mm-hmm. And so I've tried all these different apps, but being someone who uses fertility awareness and who used to actually write stuff on paper, some of those apps, you can't turn the predictor off. And that kind of stuff drives me up the wall because because fertility awareness isn't about prediction. So I really appreciate the way that you developed the app.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, we've tried to stay true to that, to the super user, like to people who want to understand their data. And one of our founding beliefs is that women are intelligent and smart enough to interpret and understand their own data. And a lot of the other apps don't have that assumption. It's kind of an obvious assumption, but a lot of the apps out there don't have that assumption. Mm-hmm. And it's just more of that. It's just more sexism, I think, and the assumption that women don't want to see their data. Like if men had uteruses, there'd be graphs up the wazoo and regression analysis, all kinds of stuff, like all the cool stuff that we want to do with Kindara. So I'm glad that you like that aspect of it. And we're now at a point with the company where we're struggling with how do we make it more accessible and approachable and make it easier for people to get started without selling out that core of, if you're a hardcore data nerd and you want to understand your data, how do we keep that aspect alive? Because there's a barrier. Like say, if you and I are two women sitting around and I'm complaining about the pill and you say, oh, you should download Kindara, there's this app, check it out. And someone downloads Kindara, right now it's pretty confusing for that person if they haven't read Taking Charge of Your Fertility or haven't done a class or anything. So right now we're struggling with how do we make it so that someone can download Kindara and then 9 months later, or 3 months later, 90 days later, know everything about fertility awareness and feel like they got this.
That's a challenge.
Yeah. So we're looking at cool stuff like in-app coaching and getting fertility counselors and stuff through the app and creating an easy onboarding process so you get started with maybe one fertility sign first and then add in the second one. So we're dealing with that kind of stuff, which is going to be really cool because I want it to be that a woman can download it and we have enough information and support that she doesn't feel alone. Like from the second she downloads it, she feels like, okay, somebody is helping me and I'm going to get to where I want to get to and learn this stuff, whether she's trying to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy or understand a thyroid problem or just figure out like why her cycles are so long or so short or whatever it is.
That's really exciting. And it's really exciting that you have that vision in mind because the places, like even just in the 30 seconds when you were talking, my imagination was kind of going wild, and there's so much that you can do with the platform. And I mean, one of the things I really feel sets you apart, as you know, from all the other apps, or not all of them, but many of them, I guess I should say, is even just the community that you've created. The fact that you can go in and you can share your charts and other women can comment on them and you can get some support. I mean, albeit it's, if you're just learning, it's not always going to be the most accurate information from some woman who just also learned the charting. But at the same time, you don't feel like you're alone and you do have multiple people giving you information, which as women, we're social creatures. And I feel like when I look back at how I learned the fertility awareness method, part of the reason that I was able to feel so confident is because I was fortunate enough to live in Edmonton. And I was with, as I mentioned before we started the podcast, I was part of the Fertility Awareness Charting Circle in Edmonton. And so every month I would meet with a bunch of women and we would talk about our charts and we gradually started teaching other women and we just hung out and talked about our charts every month. And that's how you gain your confidence. That's how you learn. You learn from each other. And that's,
yeah. I think there has to be a human element in learning the method, because you can't there's so many different scenarios and unique situations that come along. And so I think you need some kind of human input, and we're trying to figure out how do we do that through the phone. And the community was our first crack at it. We're like, all right, people probably feel pretty alone. Like, let's do this feature where people can at least see that other people are in the same situation as they are and can chat with them. So that's been a big hit. And it's cool to like see the conversations that are happening in there. And there's some really intense ones, and there's some like amazing triumphs where people go through multiple cycles and then finally get pregnant. And there's hundreds of people watching, and that's just awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. There's so many things about it that I love. So for someone who's listening and maybe they haven't used Kindara yet or they haven't heard of Kindara, And maybe they're thinking of like, oh, what charting app should I use? Or I use a different app. Or so for someone who's maybe using something different or maybe not using anything at all, how would you, I guess, describe to that person, like, why should they use Kindara? And what are some of the functionalities that you've specifically developed, other than the ones we talked about, I guess, but to help women to really be successful in their fertility awareness charting?
Well, we're definitely one of the only apps that is centered around being a fertility awareness app. Like, we built this app so that women can have a reliable, sophisticated, and elegant solution for using fertility awareness, whether they want to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy. So a lot of the other apps that there are like period tracking apps based on the rhythm method, or they kind of incorporate some kind of fertility awareness elements. But for better or for worse, at least for our marketing right now, because we are more focused than those period tracking apps, Kindara is a fertility awareness based app, like at its core. So it's got that going for it. And then the community, I think, is really cool. Women can share their charts, get advice, ask questions, get answers. And then you can also share your chart with your practitioner, and your practitioner can log in at practitioner.kindara.com and see your chart. And so you've got that kind of connectivity. We have a web app that's super basic. We're cross-platform, so
Nice.
Those are some of the reasons that I would say.
Well, and I was listening,
and it's pretty. The chart is beautiful, in my opinion, and I think that's important because people are looking at this thing all the time. I think it should be nice to look at.
Yes, it is pretty, and that is important because I don't know, we're all in this age. You gotta have it looking nice and functioning.
Yeah, everything needs to look nice. Exactly. Yeah. Design is the new engineering.
Totally is. And one of I was listening to an interview, and I think, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that in the interview it was said that Kindara is now responsible for something like 25,000 pregnancies, something like that.
I think we're like over 60,000 now.
Wow, that was an old interview. That's really cool.
Yeah, so that feels great. That's like a sky dome full of pregnant babies.
It's a lot of babies.
Yeah, it's a lot of babies. So that feels great. And a lot of those women are, so we see women coming to use Kindara to avoid pregnancy, and then they decide they want to get pregnant, so then they use it to get pregnant, and then after they have the baby, they come back and use it to avoid pregnancy again. So that's really cool to see people cycling through. And then after years of that, you can imagine a woman having a total lifetime history of her reproductive health, and going into menopause, being able to see that transition on her charts. And how cool would that be?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I always talk about on the show is how, women kind of fall into fertility awareness for whatever reason. Maybe they were trying to get rid of the hormones, transition off the pill, and then they find fertility awareness, or they want to get pregnant and they find fertility awareness. But what they don't realize is that you're getting this like health tool and this reflection of your overall health showing up on your chart. And you can see how making different changes in your life, as you mentioned, you have years of these charts, and you can actually look back and see the transition. Like, oh yeah, when I first started charting, I wasn't eating too good and I wasn't exercising a whole lot. And then, 3 years later, look at how great my charts look, or whatever the case. It's amazing.
Yeah. One of our advisors is fond of saying that the menstrual cycle is a vital sign.
Yep.
And it is. And if something is wrong there, you can kind of intuit that something is wrong somewhere else. And just like if you're measuring heart rate or respiratory, like how much oxygen you're taking in or not. So I think that's a cool way to look at it. It's a vital sign that is with a woman throughout her entire life.
Mm-hmm. And imagine if doctors were aware of this, and instead of like suppressing it, they could actually understand. If you had some issue with your cycle, they could actually understand what it meant in terms of your overall health. That would be the world I would like to live in, because that would be amazing.
It's coming. I feel like it's coming. There's, the Facts group. Have you had Marguerite Duane on the show yet?
No, not yet.
So I can intro you guys. But she's a doctor basically trying to teach doctors about fertility awareness.
Awesome.
And so that's really cool. And yeah, it's definitely coming. And, all this quantified self-data tracking that's happening, people want to track their information. And we're realizing, like, if we don't track stuff, then we can't optimize our health.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely coming. We've had people requesting an integration with Strava, so that Strava is a running and cycling app. So it's where all like the hardcore runners and cyclers track all their information. So we can integrate and then do a regression of estrogen level versus runtime,
Wow.
and to help these athletes optimize. And they know now in the athlete community that their times are better during certain periods of their cycle. And so we could take that to another level and really learn new things about human physiology.
Yeah.
So all that's really cool and is coming.
That's like what you were talking about with like if men had uteruses, and like I totally think, just as you said, if men had uteruses, there would be like charts of when your optimal strength or when your optimal this or that, or even just mindset, so that you know when to schedule that big meeting. And that, I think, is kind of the next phase of this for women, like not anytime soon, but women already kind of do that to some extent. They might know when they have more energy or when they start charting, and the possibilities are endless.
I know. We'd love to integrate something like that. Miranda Gray I think she might be Canadian. I'm not sure actually, but she wrote a book called The Optimized Woman.
Oh.
And she goes through each of the phases of the cycle and talks about the hormone profile and what that might mean for what you are good at and what you might not enjoy as much. And it's really cool. And so we could do something like that in Kindara, where we could help coach people based on their data, and it'd just be so cool. So hopefully we'll get there. Fingers crossed.
Man, I'd love to sit in like Kindara meetings. It just the stuff that must be like, explored is awesome. So I guess in that vein, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but when you think about Kindara, like 2 years from now or even 5 years from now, do you want to talk a little bit, obviously not to give away, but just to talk a little bit about where you see yourself?
Yeah, totally. So I've thought about this a lot, because as we've grown as a company, our vision has grown too. Like, you start with a vision and then you kind of do it, but by the time you've accomplished that, the vision is now this big. And so then it keeps expanding, which is really cool. And so I thought about this a lot. And the central insight of Kindara is that women want to understand their bodies and feel powerful in their bodies. And so taking that insight and blowing it up as big as it could possibly be, you can imagine there's a bunch of other apps we want to do that are all focused around helping women feel powerful in their bodies and understanding their reproductive health. There's a bunch of other hardware products that we want to do that are all similarly focused around that same insight. And the vision for the company is a brand that has a mission to help women feel powerful inside their bodies and understand their health as a way to transform culture in the world. And so I want to go as big as we can go, as big as we're able to go on that, and see how big of a change we can make by getting these new products out into the world that are nicely designed, that help women feel good about their health. So that's the big vision, is a bunch of apps, a bunch of devices, all under this banner of, hey, this stuff should exist.
That is awesome. And speaking of stuff that should exist, I'd love for you to talk about Wink, because I think that is like the coolest idea ever, and I'm patiently waiting for it to come out. It hasn't come out yet, has it?
No. So it's coming out this summer or spring. And so Wink is our connected thermometer. And it was from the beginning, when Katie and I started using fertility awareness, she had this crappy thermometer, and we were always like, why is there no good thermometer? Like, how does a good thermometer not exist? Like a beautifully designed thermometer that's super accurate and is up to the task of helping a woman avoid pregnancy or get pregnant. Like, both of those are very high value problems. And the only thing that existed was these $5 cheap plastic thermometers. And we're like, that's just offensive. Like, there should be a beautifully designed thermometer that women can trust because it's high quality, and we should make it because it should be seamless integration between the app and the thermometer. So that was our original idea from the beginning, and it took us a while to actually get it together. And now we've gone through a design process, and we feel really good with the design. We think it's really smart in a lot of ways, and now it's going to come out this year. And then that's going to be great, because at the beginning, when we started the company, we're like, let's make a beautiful app and a beautiful thermometer. And when it comes out, we'll have done that. So that'll be a really nice moment of celebration for us when we get there.
Well, let me just say, like, That's the greatest idea ever for women using fertility awareness, because you take your temperature in the morning and you are tired in the morning. And then
Right.
it's dark or whatever when you get up early and you have to turn on the light and then you have to like figure out your phone and then you have to fumble through all these numbers. And as elegant and beautifully designed as you can make the temperature recording thing, it's always fumbling through numbers. That's what it always is. So
Yeah, totally.
having the ability to take your temperature and have the thermometer talk to the phone and just put it in there automatically is brilliant, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. We've had a pretty good reception, so I'm hoping that a lot of other women will like it too. And I think there's something about, like, I call it the talismanic effect. Like, there's something about an object that has been created for a specific purpose that just makes it easier to do whatever it is you want to do with that object. Like, up until now, there has not been a really nice thermometer created for women who want to use this as birth control or who want to use it to get pregnant. And I think having that object exist communicates that this is important enough that somebody went to all the trouble to create this object.
It's true.
And that's important because this stuff, as we were talking about before, is important. And it deserves good tech around it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's very exciting for me to see these innovations, and it's very exciting for me to hear your energy and just to see how passionate you are. Because so when I first learned about fertility awareness, I'm still very passionate, obviously, but I think I was like 19 and I was super passionate. And so what did I do? I actually, one of my friends actually created this book that she was using for her own charts. So this is where we're at back then in like 2002 or whatever. And so she created this book in like Excel spreadsheet charts and all that kind of stuff. And then I was like, that's a great idea. So I created my own book, and then I started selling it to my friends. And like, that was the extent of yeah. So I created this book. So it's like real, like, people are like, what the heck is she talking about? What do you mean Excel spreadsheet? Like, so that's where I started. And so to see where it's going, this is fantastic. So it makes me very excited just to see where we're at now. And it makes me also very excited for the future to see where we will be.
That's awesome. Yeah. Did you have that reaction that I had and Katie had, like, when you first learned it? And you want everybody else to know about it, right?
Yeah. First of all, I was straight up pissed. So I was like, what the heck do you mean I'm not fertile every day? Like, I was actually angry because this is important. This is my body. Like you said, like, who owns it? You're totally right when you said that, because like, I don't even know this is going on. All this is going on inside my body and I have no idea. Like, so I was pissed. And then, of course, I had to tell, that's why I made the books. Like, I made tons of it. I sold them to my friends, and like, people were buying them from me, and I never made any money because it's expensive to print books. But that wasn't the point. It was more just, there's so many women that know fertility awareness that I can say I had a part in that because I wouldn't shut up about it.
Right. Yeah, that's the common reaction, which is cool, you know. What do you think needs to happen? You know, if I could ask you a question.
Oh, of course.
What do you think needs to happen to get this into the mainstream? I think that's the question we've been asking ourselves.
Well, that's part of the reason I do this. I don't know where I'm going to be in terms of like, I don't know what the reception is going to be. I don't know. Like, I've had a really positive response so far. I've had lots of women reach out to me and, you know, thank me for doing this, because there's nothing like this out there yet. So even just what I'm doing, I feel that to some extent, fertility awareness has kind of been behind a veil. You always have to, you know, buy a book or find someone who knows about it. And so and I feel like sometimes, you know, when you teach it, you don't want to give away the information, because then you might be afraid, like you said, that you won't make any money. Because if you tell people about it for free, then how could you charge? What would you have left? So I feel that there's a barrier to women like just giving it away. And so enter me. I was like, you know what? You know, I believe that, you know, if you want to create a business out of something, you can find a way to support and help women. And, you know, I don't know what that is yet, even for me, but I feel that the first step in raising awareness is talking about it. And so a lot of the women and now man that I've interviewed are, specialize in the field of fertility awareness. And I'm giving them a platform and opening up the conversation. And so I'm not saying I'm the solution, but that's one thing that I'm doing because it's important to me, because in a podcast, you're not going to learn all the details about how to chart. But in a podcast, maybe you can discover what fertility awareness is when you didn't even know before. And now you know it's an option. And that's like the key. Because as soon as women get hold of this information, they run with it like crazy people.
Yeah, they want it. Right? Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah, I think awareness is the answer. Is that if you polled the population, I think only a few percentage points of people know that this exists. And so I'm really excited about Sweetening the Pill, the movie that is going to come out I think in 2017 now. So I think that'll do a lot. And yeah, your podcast, and we're trying to get this out there at Kindara, and it'll be interesting to see, like, because there's a tipping point at some point, right? When enough people know about it, that you create that network of connections and people hear about it more than once, and then it accelerates. And we've seen that over the last 4 years. It's starting to ramp up, and I hope that soon we'll reach that point, and a lot of people will know about it, because that'll be really exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's why what you're doing is so important, because you're getting lots of exposure, and it's like you think 60,000 births are a lot, or pregnancies, but 10 years from now it's going to be bananas, because only the tiniest percentage of women even know about this.
Yeah.
And the only place for you is growth. That's the only, there's no down. It's just growth. That's it.
Yeah. Hope so.
Well, in my humble opinion, of course.
I'm going to hold you to that.
All right. Well, it's on tape, so.
Yeah.
So just to kind of wrap up today's show, I just have a couple final questions that I tend to ask. And I think you might have answered this one, but I think I want to ask it anyways, just to see. So have you found that there's one question that women who use Kindara ask the most? Is there anything that stands out?
Am I pregnant?
Yeah, I can see that.
Mostly from women trying to get pregnant.
Yeah, when they're on like the 6th day after ovulation.
Yeah, or like the 3rd day of their cycle, or any day really.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get that one a lot. On the birth control side, we get a lot of, hey, can you help me figure out my chart? And luckily, we have a customer support lead, Lauren Risberg, who is amazing. She uses fertility awareness. She did her master's thesis on fertility awareness, and so she's pretty equipped to answer pretty much anything that comes in. And we try to do our best. Like, we don't give medical advice and we don't give definitive answers, but we try to do our best to answer whatever comes in. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So those are the most common ones. Basically, what's going on with my chart? Can you help me understand?
Yeah. Fair. That's generally, until it starts to make sense, that's the big question on your mind.
Yeah.
And for any of the listeners who are considering using the fertility awareness or considering transitioning off of hormonal birth control, but are scared of making the leap because maybe they're scared that it doesn't work, do you have any words of encouragement?
Yes. I would call them words of advice. So I would say it's like riding a bike. When you learn to ride a bike, you have training wheels, and the training wheels keep you from toppling over and hitting the curb. And so we always say, for a woman who wants to use fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy, chart for 90 days. Like, come off the pill, chart for 90 days, see if your cycle is regulating. But during that period, just use condoms. Like, don't rely on it until you know you can rely on it. So chart for 90 days, use condoms, have your charts reviewed by somebody who teaches the method. And in most areas, there's somebody or there's people who do that over the phone. And at some point, you'll feel like, okay, I got this. You'll be like, all right, I understand it. I'm on the bike. I'm zipping along. The training wheels aren't even touching the ground. It's time to take the training wheels off. And when you get to that point where you feel like, okay, I got this. I understand the rules. I've shown my charts to somebody and who knows what they're talking about, and they've confirmed that I know what I'm talking about. And I just get it. I just get how the method works and how my body works. Then start using it for birth control. So I'd say it's definitely not I'm coming off the pill on Monday and on Tuesday I'm using fertility awareness as my birth control, because it takes time for the cycle to regulate in a lot of cases. So I'd say just go into it knowing that and be easy on yourself and know that, like, okay, it'll take 90 days or 120 days or whatever it is. But after that period, you'll have it. And then once you have it forever.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. No, I love that. And yeah, it clicks. And when it clicks, it clicks. So one last question. What would you say is one of the most or the most common myth or misunderstanding about the fertility awareness method that you would like to see corrected?
That it's the rhythm method. That's an easy one. So it gets compared with the rhythm method all over the place and all the time, and we've been combating that head on. And it's not the rhythm method. They're completely different. The rhythm method is about 70% accurate at best, or effective at best. And at best, fertility awareness is over 99% effective. And they bear no resemblance to one another. I mean, they do slightly, but for the sake of this argument, we really try to differentiate them from one another. Yep. So that would be the main myth to dispel. If I could snap my fingers and have one disappear, that would be it.
Yeah, and every time you mention fertility awareness, you wouldn't have to mention rhythm and explain it and describe how they're different. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool. Yeah. All right. Well, how can our listeners get in touch with you, or even just, we talked about Kindara a lot, so maybe you can just tell listeners how to get in touch with you online.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Will Sachs, or you can email me at Will, WILL, @Kindara.com. If you have any questions or suggestions or anybody wants to chat. And Kindara.com. That's where everything lives. We have a blog. We have tons of good information on there. We have a knowledge base. You can buy Wink. If anyone's listening and wants this future that we're describing to exist, please go and buy Wink, because that'll help us succeed as a company and help get this mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Will, thank you so much for being here today, for being so generous with your time. And I really enjoyed our conversation. It was a lot of fun to chat with you, and we tackled some pretty serious topics today. So it was a lot of fun, and I'm really glad that I was able to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I had a lot of fun too. And I think what you're doing is great, and hopefully we can keep doing what we're doing and see things shift. And I think that's going to be really exciting.
Yeah. No, as soon as I found out that I could do my own radio show in my basement, I was like, sold. Who let me have a microphone? So, awesome. Yeah, super fun. And yeah, so I'm super excited to see what you're doing with Kindara. And I absolutely love the work you're doing. It inspires me, and I'm inspired by your passion for this work. And so keep doing it.
Thanks. Yeah, will do.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, just search for Fertility Friday on iTunes or Stitcher, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And of course, if you're loving the show, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes so that more people can find it. And as for me, you can find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday. You can stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes for today's episode, which you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/will. You can also find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page, which is facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.